Hi, Amy. Great to have you on the show, and really excited. So I know you as Wiccan priestess, and I believe we've been following on each other on Instagram for quite a while now. So
Yes, we have. We've been
it's nice.
orbiting each other.
We have. It's nice to actually meet.
Yes.
So yeah. So tell us a bit about how long you've been involved in Wicca and paganism and parts adjacent.
Well, I've been practicing the craft since 1999. After doing book reading on my own, I think as most of us started out in the late 90s. I found a traditional coven to study with, and I was initiated to the first degree in 2003. And then I moved to solitary practice after that coven dissolved. The high priestess died, and it just didn't
Oh,
continue on after that. But in 2007, I began an apprenticeship with an amazing priestess named Susan Stoddard, and she instilled in me a love of research and this very Zen, chop wood, haul water sort of spirituality. And I honed a lot of my skills in astrology and herbalism and ecstatic practices while I was with her. And then she got me in touch with another of her students, a priestess named Taz Chance, and I integrated into Taz's coven in 2009. First as like a long distance, we called it a foreign exchange priestess, and then as an initiate to the first and the second. And after I completed my master's degree in professional and technical writing, I was initiated to the third degree in 2019, so a full 20 years after I first self-dedicated as a witch. I've helped to organize Mid-Missouri Pagan Pride Day, as well as presented workshops at Pagan Picnic in St. Louis. Currently, I'm the handmaiden for the Conclave of the Craft, which is a traditional initiatory Wiccan church that kind of forms the outer court of Taz's coven and my coven, and the covens that have kind of descended or integrated, or so that's like our big extended family is what we call it. I'm actively teaching students, and I hope to have my first set of initiates next year.
cool. Excellent. Um, so yeah, where would you say you sit on the queer landscape, so to speak?
Well, I'm a queer person, by which I mean pansexual, panromantic, and non-binary. But queer is just easier to throw out in conversation, and it also embodies, a different way of thinking about life instead of just the mechanics of sexuality and gender. Queer is a political orientation as well as a sexual orientation, and I'm also, kinky and polyamorous and non or neurodivergent. La 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 la, my words. Um, and those identities have a huge overlap with the queer community.
Mm.
I use they, them pronouns and identify more as human than man or woman. Before I had the vocabulary to explain my queerness, I would tell people that my feminine side was butch and my masculine side was a queen. And for the longest time, I thought I couldn't do gender correctly. And it's only been in the last few years that I've realized that I do gender exactly right. I just don't fit into the norms of the overculture, which is just about right for an Aquarius.
Yes, that sounds about right. Yeah, yeah. I'm very confused because I'm Cancer with Leo rising, so I don't know whether I'm an extrovert or an introvert. Um, I think I'm an ambivert, which sits very well with being non-binary and bisexual and all that as well. So
In the middle, floating around, doing our own thing. That's just what we do.
yeah, that's the one. I love that about your feminine side is butch and your masculine side is a queen. That's brilliant.
It's true. I was asked to call God into the circle once, and my God is very much more Dionysian and effeminate, and like that. And I have not been asked since to do that. There will be a circle when I do, but it was just my first run as priesting in a circle. And yeah, I called the what resonated with me, and that's what came.
Fair. I like it. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I must say, the first time I ever invoked a god onto myself, I went with Mercury because I was like, right, I'm going to start somewhere in the middle and then move my way gradually across.
Good boy, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. So, how accommodating or inclusive or affirming of your is your tradition of your queerness? Would you say?
I would say that it's pretty darn affirming. One of our initiatory lines leads back to Stanley Mazuris of First Temple of the Craft of Wicca, which is out of the Chicago area, and he was one of the first people, at least in the Midwest and maybe even the U.S., to say back in the early '70s that queer folk were welcome in circle and that they didn't mess up the energy, as some people back then were saying. My coven has a good mix of people as far as gender identities and sexual orientations go, but we've worked really hard to expand that and make all people feel a sense of belonging, not just emotionally but spiritually. Um, because really, I mean, the bottom line is we hope that everyone who attends our rituals feels like they're a perfect reflection of the beauty of deity. So we've had some growing pains. We've definitely had some trial and error moments as we've gone about expanding, but I think we're in the curve, or maybe a little ahead of the curve as far as inclusion goes.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So you mentioned about having, gendered roles in the circle.
Mhm.
So how does that work?
Well, we look, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We want to expand rather than totally reinvent. So, for example, the office of handmaiden, even though you're called handmaiden, and that's kind of a loaded term, thanks to the
Margaret Atwood, yes.
the TV show that's come out. But it's just the term that was passed down to us. But that's basically the understudy to whoever it is who invokes the goddess energy or the cosmic energy in circle. And so that can go to someone who is woman identified or man identified, but it's the role of um, assisting the whoever the priestess is that like that's what that title embodies.
Yeah.
Similarly, we have the fire tender, who is in some traditions maybe called the summoner, who's similarly like the understudy to the priest, and does a lot of the guarding of circle, the um, what's the word I'm looking for, the um, protecting of the energies. And so again, that role can be filled by somebody who is a woman or a man, but they have to have the skills and abilities to do what the priest does in case something, lightning strikes the priest or something, or he passes out in circle, or they pass out in circle. We're actually blessed to have a female bodied, non-binary oriented or identified priest, that if you met Alex, you would not realize they're very trans mask, but they're still in that in between. It would be inappropriate to call them two spirited because they weren't raised in indigenous culture, but they
Yeah.
have some strong indigenous heritage that help to waken that part up in them.
Hmm, that's cool. Um, yeah, so it sounds like although the roles have the traditional names, they're not
Right, they're
actually
not.
gendered. Right, I
and
get
and
it.
we also train each of our initiates to be able to do both roles, but eventually what they are initiated as has more to do with what direction they feel they're most called to do.
Right. Yeah, well, that makes sense. I like it. Yes, it's a bit like uh, there's a great book, Non-Binary Witchcraft by Fisdom and I, where they talk about having different roles in the circle, um, but they're assigned by people being good at those skills as opposed to, oh, you're this gender, therefore you're going to do this role. So it
Right.
sounds like you're like in a similar.
We've kind of adopted that kind of policy as well.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. Like my workaround is to kind of think, well, actually, I'm not sure that any of these roles have a gender attached to them.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone can cast the circle, anyone can do any of the things.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, very
And you'd
similar.
hope, be a well-rounded practitioner, you would be able to do all those things.
Yeah, yeah, you would hope so. Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Um, yeah. So do you have a personal practice?
My personal practice has really ebbed and flowed, especially with the pandemic. I feel a lot of the time like I wake up first thing in the morning and go, "Oh Goddess, I just need to get through this day," and then the last thing I do is say, "Thanks Goddess, now please get me enough rest so that I can do it all over again tomorrow." But I'm slowly reintegrating elements of practice that had gone by the wayside. So like honoring the ancestors at the dark moon is something that has been really important to me, and I've just been um, like I've lacked the spiritual spoons to be able to do that. But and then actually spending time under the light of the full moon. I live in a townhouse complex, so going outside and having ritual under the full moon is really not, I mean, unless I want all my neighbors wondering what I'm doing. So I have ritual inside, but then it takes away from the feel of being outside under the light of the
Mm,
moon. So I'm trying to reintegrate that, even if I don't do a full on ritual, to be able to honor the lady in that way. One of my favorite things that I'm doing right now is I call it coffee with the goddess, and I basically just have a hot beverage and give myself an hour to focus on meditation or contemplation, or work on my essays. Right now I'm working on, I have this huge practical magic style book of shadows, and it's been blank for years, and the time has finally come to scribe in it. So that's my coffee with the goddess work lately, has been scribing in my book. And those seem like small things, but my practice has been very much centered on the doing rather than the thinking,
Mm.
because I was an armchair priestess for a long time until I realized that it's the doing that gets you where you want to go in the craft.
Yes, I think that's very true. Um, yeah, I mean, full disclosure, I'm terrible with personal practice stuff. Um, so
I can
uh,
understand that. I've been there.
yeah, and I think you're right. I think a lot of us have just kind of gone, you know, the the juice has just gone out of things,
Hmm.
because I think when you're regularly meeting other people for ritual, you get sort of a top
Yeah.
up. And I'm finding, like, I do training over Zoom, and then I'm like, um, uh, I sort of feel depleted afterwards. Whereas if I do ritual over Zoom, or even better in person,
In person, yes. You got
then
that energy that comes with having been in circle. Yeah.
yes, definitely. And I'm really missing that massively. So
Me too. We're slowly, I'm fully immunized, and we're slowly getting back to meeting in person and doing training and practicum in person. Because it's really hard to teach people how to move energy when you're not there to move the energy with them.
absolutely, yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I haven't been. We've just been doing the theoretical stuff over Zoom, really. So yeah, it's quite hard, definitely. Yeah, and I think just the lack of actually hanging out with other people has been a big deal during the pandemic
Yeah.
as well.
I miss my people.
Yeah, I have really enjoyed doing these interviews though, because it's been, hey, meet new people, and you know, my ambit.
I do like Zoom for like doing community chats and check-ins and doing training lectures, things that are more thinking about than doing.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I'm like, okay, this is another Zoom meeting and I have to get in the right headspace. And, what does the background look like? One time I shot a video and it was like the background was entirely the inappropriate side of my bookcase.
yes,
Oops. Oh well.
yeah, yeah. The magic books are through in the room behind me, so the stuff on the shelves here is not especially magical. So, um, well, that brings us neatly to books, which is so, because the next question is, do you have a favorite book on queer paganism or magic or Wicca?
Well, I'm not sure if this qualifies, but the first book that opened my eyes to like the different ways of thinking about magical energy, kind of queering the idea, was Casting Sacred Spaces by Ivo Dominguez.
Ah,
I read the first edition when I was training with Susan, and that it was like the meme with the guy trying to wrap himself around like the totality of space time. Mind blown. That was my first experience with a book that wasn't like, this is masculine energy and this is feminine energy. It's more like, well, there's null energy and there's neuter energy and there's static energy. And so it didn't really address queerness as such, but it shook up the binarist way of thinking about energies that I had been kind of surrounded with. And so I think that's pretty radical and pretty amazing. So,
excellent.
so it's not a book on queer paganism or witchcraft so much as it is a book written by a queer person on how they experience energy and want to share it with the world.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think uh, Ivo Dominguez has been quietly plugging away at this stuff for a long
Mhm.
time.
Oh yeah.
Um, Definitely deserves more kudos, I feel. Yeah, actually, yeah, I should ask him. Ask, not sure of pronoun. I should ask them if they want to do an interview. That'd be cool. Sorry. So, what was the title again?
It's called Casting Sacred Space.
Casting Sacred Space. Right, because I'm going to add it to my list of recommendations on my blog. Because that's good.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I have a queer pagan reading list on my blog, um, which I update every so often. So that's very
Well, I'm
exciting.
just so glad that there are becoming more books. Like
Yeah,
there's some that are just out, and some that have been out for a few years, and some that are just like, I'm gonna be, this book will drop in the next 6 months. Get excited. And so yeah, I've definitely got 3 or 4 on my bookcase that are in my to read pile. Thomas Frower's book and your book and gosh, who am I missing? I can't see it over there. Oh well.
Misha Maudlin, Cassandra Snow.
Yes. I was like, his name's not Misha. It's Tamsin now. So yeah. But yeah, I've just had so much going on in my mundane life that reading has kind of gone on the wayside. But I'm getting up to some vacation time, so I'll get some reading
Yay,
done.
that's very cool. I love it. Um, okay, so do you have a definition of queer magic?
I do. Queer magic is magic that breaks the binary and subverts unjust cultural norms, um, transgresses assumptions about how reality works. So it's this brilliant, chaotic thing, and it's wonderfully transformative. I think that's what the magic is. It's more than just what magic queer people do. It's a
Yes,
way of thinking about the magic that questions the underlying framework about how we were taught magic works and what is supposed to be used for, and then just goes on to manifest spectacular results by bending or breaking that framework.
that's a great definition. That's really, really good. You clearly thought about that.
I did. I was like, what is queer magic really?
That's brilliant.
It's more than what queer people do. It is
Definitely.
a queering, as the academics would say, a queering of the construct.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I actually went to the point of in eventually saying queerness and magic are the same thing because they're both a very different way of looking at the world. But then, unfortunately, there's an awful lot of heterocentric magic out there. So, um, and then I'm like, aha, but is it magic? But yeah, that was a great definition. That should be in the dictionary definition. It was so good.
I hope one day somebody decides that they're going to like my definition. I put it in a book and say, "Hey, this is what Amy came up with," and I'll be like, "Oh my God, now I'm big and pagan."
Yeah, that was really, really good. Fantastic.
Oh, but it's all fun. It's all good.
Yeah, it's been fun asking that question because everyone's got a slightly different take, and it's sort of given their nice sort of sparkly, nebulous picture of what it is. I think you pretty much covered all the bases there. That was very good.
Awesome. I win the universe. No.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Very good. So yeah, do you have a blog or website that you would like us to tell us about?
Yeah, I have a blog. It's called Mirth and Reverence with Amy Ray, and the address is amyray.com. And that's where I house a mix of creative nonfiction that has to do with the pagan poo world and some informative articles that I wrote mostly just because I was in the process of teaching students, and I was like, if I drop dead, how am I going to transmit this knowledge? So basically, my answer to that was, well, blog. And then it's there at least for a little while after you get hit by a car or the universe opens up and you fall into it or something like that. But so yeah, I hadn't really thought of it as a platform other than like my local area. But I've had people just randomly comments like, "Hey, I'm from far away, and you really opened my eyes to this." So I hope that it does some good to get some juices flowing in people's brains and thinking about these wonderful ideas that we're building our religion off of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had a look and I liked what I saw. So cool. So anything else you would like to share?
Anything else I'd like to share? I guess I sometimes worry about how paganism is going to integrate queerness into its matrix, whether it's going to be that, capitalist heteronormative assimilation and the binary becoming a trinary to pseudo accommodate people who are different, or whether it's going to transform the culture entirely and just promote justice in all ways. I feel like we can either be accepted by the overculture or we can claim our power as queer people. And that's a difficult path to navigate, especially since the pagans who have been working for decades and decades to make us respectable and not a laughing stock might have to give up some of that comfort in order for us to move justly forward.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people still equate the LGBT community with the queer community, but they're really different things.
Yes.
As the
Completely
slogan
agree.
goes, not gay isn't happy, but queer isn't fu.
Yes.
But as queer people, we need to create a space for our own culture that's not reliant on straight culture as a framework, and that's really hard. Does the fish know that the fish is in water until the fish is out of water,
Mm,
kind of thing? But I think that um, we can be empowered by what historically queerness has been. We have been different, and we have been associated with spiritual power and authority. So
mm.
on one hand, we can't have it both ways, and on the other hand, there has to be a middle ground. Um, so I'm not going to say that we can either be a cog in the machine or we can throw a wrench into the whole works, because that's really binarist thinking. I think there is a middle path forward.
Mm.
I just don't know where queer paganism in America is going to go, or queer paganism in the world is going to go, but we're going. We're merrily on this road trip together, so we'll see what happens.
I think so. I mean, I was reminded of the current controversy, which has been going on for at least the last 3 years, because I've seen it and blogged about it and everything about kink at Pride, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because on the one hand, there's the people who want to go, oh yes, let's make Pride a party, and you know, all the corporate interests can come with their big buses and their balloons and whatever, whatever. And then on the other hand, there's the edgy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I was in Pride in London, UK, and uh, we were we were placed in the march, and then right behind us were the people whose kink is dressing as dogs,
Mm-hmm.
and they had all their masks on and everything. Um, and mostly that was totally fine, but there was one or two there was one guy who had like a mask that was like a skull
Mm-hmm.
of a dog, and I was like,
That's a little weird.
yeah, your kink is not my kink, but that's okay. um
And it's
but
and it's really
I think the thing is, like, I saw a debate on Instagram about this today, and I was thinking, so I commented on it, in the kink community there's a saying, your kink is not my kink, but that's okay. um and why can't vanilla people embrace that point of view
right.
as well? um and somebody commented, yes, but there's also the thing that you have to consent to um you have to consent to witnessing sexual acts. And I'm like, okay, so where's the
There's the
boundary?
boundary between I'm walking down the street in my leather costume and I'm flogging somebody who's just so into it that they're, I
Yeah,
don't know, drooling all over the place.
yeah,
There has to be a, like, if it's a public event, there has to be some kind of constraint.
yeah,
But
sure, constraint.
I don't think, on the other hand, that we should tell the leather people who buried a lot of people, the older leather daddies, that they
Yeah,
can't march in pride in their regalia. Basically,
absolutely. I mean,
that's
like,
part of the culture, it's part of the history.
totally part of the history. I mean, the post that was shared was a photo of a guy in 1984,
Mhm.
um, the year 1984, not the movie, with a sign saying "Kinky and Proud," and I'm like, yes, you see, kinky people have been at Pride forever.
All, mm-hmm.
Yeah, um,
Always been there.
and and there was, as always, a fair fair amount of debate in
Don't
the
read the
comments.
comments, you'll get mad. Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, all the comments I could see were agreeing with the post, so that was good. Um, and anyways, then there was this whole thing about where's the consent, where's the boundary, and I'm like, well, provided that are actually kind of, doing overtly sexual stuff. And somebody pointed out, if a child sees it, you just go, they're just playing, I'll explain later when you're older, or
Right.
they're just dressed up, they're just playing dress up,
Yep.
or, you know, the kid's not going to know, are they?
Right, exactly. I just think I think there's a line between being too politically correct and being really truly um, embracing and affirming. And
Yeah,
it's a thin line.
yeah,
But having hosted, and put on public events, we've had to basically tell people, no, you can't have your explicit, book of photos for your gallery. It has to be like the censored version, because if you're selling BDSM equipment or whatever it is, you have to make this, the standard of common decency is not because it is kinky, it is because it is sexually explicit.
Yes. Yeah, and that's totally fair.
Yeah.
And I think so I think where I was going with all of that was this sort of thing of, you have a subculture or a different culture,
Hmm.
and it meets the mainstream, and then so the mainstream is going to get changed by the subculture, but
Hmm.
also the subculture will get
Culture has
changed by the
changed.
mainstream.
Yep.
And then it's like, well, uh and I'm seeing, I've been around in the pagan community since 1985, so I've seen all this stuff, and um I think it has got more mainstream over that time.
It has definitely.
um like, and I think that's, but I also think that's inevitable.
Hmm.
um I mean, the thing that worries me, I think, is the commodification of it, because that's the capitalist takeover moment, isn't it?
Hmm.
um
Yep. That's what gets me too. I'm just like, you do not need these expensive things to practice the craft. You do not need um, a million books, because a lot of them are going to say the same thing.
yep.
What you really need is, um, the will to pursue it and the will to question what you're being taught, so that you can understand it better.
Yeah.
Because the
And
understanding comes with playing around with those ideas and trying the magic out. And that's the only way that you can truly learn the craft is through, you can't buy the craft. You have to practice the craft.
absolutely. And yeah, you don't need one of these sort of super witchy aesthetic, the
Hmm.
like the photo. I always think, if I was a young Wiccan or witch starting out, and I was seeing all these really amazing sort of witchy setups on Instagram,
Hmm.
I'd be terrified. I'd be like, oh, I'm never
Oh
gonna,
no, I'm not gonna make it. I'm not gonna make
yeah.
it.
I'd be like, oh, I'm never gonna achieve that standard.
You know
And
what? My first athame was a letter opener, and my first chalice was a little dollar store, or no, it was a thrift store find. And those are the tools that I go back to again and again, even though I have, a fancier athame. I have a big, beautiful pottery chalice now. And but you know what? When the chips are down and I need to work real magic, I go back to those first tools that called to me. And they don't look all spiffy and newfangled.
yeah,
They're
well,
just they're the items that called to me.
yeah, when I started out, so you couldn't, there was no internet, so you couldn't order
Right?
stuff on the internet.
You know,
um
the internet.
and the places you could buy witchy stuff were almost non-existent.
Hmm.
um so my athame is a sabatier boning knife, which I bought in a kitchen shop.
That's awesome.
And yeah, and I love it, and it's still my athame. And you know
Mhm.
I have got a couple, I've got like a travel one that I use that's made of stone, so it doesn't set off the
Set
airport
off the
alarms.
alarms.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's awesome though. I
yeah.
think just, learning the craft and practicing the craft. I mean, that's why we say we practice the craft. Whether you're straight or queer or questioning or just an experience to give to the universe. If that's how you define yourself, it's the doing and not the reading, not the thinking about the ideas, although you've got to do some of that.
Yeah,
The actual practicing of the craft that is at the heart of the craft.
I think so. I mean, I'm, being an author and all, I'm like, but you need the underlying theory to explain what you're doing, because if you don't have the underlying theory, then the heteronormative stuff that gets peddled, um, you might not notice, and you might just think
Right.
that that's right. Whereas if you sit down and actually theorize about, well, why do we do this stuff the way we do it?
Why do we do it the
um,
way we do it? That's true. We have to think about those ideas.
yeah, so like, we need some books, but yeah, you're right, like we don't need, um nobody needs 50 101 books.
Right, exactly. Um,
Yes. So they should all buy my book. So there. Yeah, no, I think that's great, and it is so interesting. You know, we're in at the ground level kind of thing. Um, we're in at the start of everything, and you kind of think, well, where is this going to go?
right. And it will go the direction that the movement leads it to.
Mm,
So I have high hopes, and I can always say, you know what, that doesn't work for me. I'm going to do my other little thing over here. If I don't jive with what the movement's doing, but every practitioner is empowered to do that.
yeah, and I think that's really important. And it's always good finding other people who are, you know, thinking along the same lines. Because I think, you know, one of my things was I was really into the idea of let's do pagan theology, and everybody else thought I was weird for years. And then I'm like, suddenly started finding other people who were
Right.
interested in that, and I'm like,
Exactly.
yay.
Yes. We need to know
um,
why we do what we do and why it's important and why the symbols matter, and how we can expand because it's not meant to be a dead thing that we just do over and over again until we've beaten the dead horse. It's a living thing. It has to grow with us.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. Yeah, awesome. Very true.
Mhm.
Yes, I mean, this whole idea of, you know, it should be a living, breathing thing. I think that's really important. Cool. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. And
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
you're very welcome. It's been great. Okay, I'm going to stop recording now.